I want to talk about setting and managing expectations for fights. Now, I've seen some things recently, some footage online. I like to scope out other content creators in the MMA YouTube community, not whether it's WMMA or men's MMA or just fighter or channels that most channels cover both. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, but especially more recently. I've been thinking about this for a while, I should say, but especially more recently. It just seems like people have weird expectations regarding certain fights, but then are far more willing to forgive others that they like. I mean, we're talking about holding lower level fighters to higher expectations than these same people will hold like champions that they like. And it just doesn't, I just don't understand it. I just don't get it. So I wanted to talk about setting and managing expectations for fights. On the thumbnail there, I have part 1. I was going to split this up into 2 parts, but I decided to do this all in one show. So what do I mean by setting and managing expectations? I'm talking about, you see a fight announced, and you've got to properly assess both fighters in that fight and then go, well, okay, so this fighter is at this level, the opponent's at this level, so my expectations for the fight are somewhere in between those two, is a good example. Or let's say it's a championship fight. So you've got a really high level champion taking on a really high level challenger. So you would naturally, I think, expect them to be higher, that fight to be high and be really good. Whereas if it's like 2 UFC debutantes, then obviously your expectations should be really like way down here. So you should set your expectations and manage them accordingly. And the most recent UFC Fight Night, I think, gave some really good examples about people just setting weird expectations or abnormal expectations on certain levels of fights. So let's start let me enlarge this real quick. In the top right corner, we have the strawweight bout where Sam Hughes defeated Elise Reed. All I saw after this fight were people trashing both of these fighters. And for some reason, a lot of people were trashing Sam Hughes. And I didn't really get it. Well, for one thing, why are you trashing the fighter who won? That didn't make much sense to me. I mean, it's not like she looked like shit and still managed to win, which I've seen, and I have, held winning fighters' feet to the fire before. If they say they exposed a big time weakness and just barely got by in the win. But here's the thing. I went into this fight with no expectations because both fighters are low level, they're unranked, and they haven't really performed very well in the fights that they've shown anything in. I mean, Sam Hughes, plus you have 2 fighters who both of them got signed based on being short notice replacement fighters and basically fought like short notice replacement fighters in their debuts and then haven't really shown much growth since then. So I didn't have any expectations out of that fight. What expectations I might have had were very low. But then I saw people like getting really mad and like trashing both fighters and trashing this fight. And it's like, you set way too high of expectations for 2 lower level unranked UFC fighters. Now, if this were, say, maybe 10 years ago, when the UFC was only trying to bring in the best fighters available in the women's divisions, and they performed badly, then sure, okay, go ahead and absolutely trash it. And I'm not saying you can't call a bad fight a bad fight. I'm saying you've got to manage expectations. This isn't the UFC of 10 years ago. It is 2022 event almost every weekend of the year UFC, where they are just booking fights and creating content to fill a time slot, or basically making content for ESPN Plus at this point. Not every fighter is going to be a world beater in today's UFC. That's just how it is. And that's honestly how I looked at this fight. And then another example would be the next fight down below, also at strawweight, where Tabitha Ricci defeated Poliana Viana. And people were saying that this fight underperformed. But my question is, underperformed compared to what? Again, this is another fight that I did not set high expectations for. And it lived up to those low expectations. Look, you have two unranked fighters. Okay. Viana has been very inconsistent in the UFC. Then you got Tabitha Ricci, who before coming to the UFC never faced a fighter with a winning record. She came into the UFC with only 5 fights to her name, and she had never faced a fighter with a winning record. So my expectations for her are low until she starts showing me something that tells me that I should expect more out of her. So you have an inconsistent unranked fighter versus a low-level unranked fighter, a fairly inexperienced unranked fighter. And people are saying, well, this fight underperformed. Again, I got to ask, what did it underperform compared to? That's what I want to know. That's my question. What did it underperform compared to? What expectations were you setting for 2 unranked fighters, one of whom is inconsistent and one of whom is very inexperienced compared to her peers? Again, you've got to manage expectations. I had low expectations out of this fight. It lived up to those low expectations. Now, is that to say that I'm not disappointed? No, I'm still disappointed that it wasn't a very good fight. I'm very disappointed that it wasn't a good fight because I want to see these ladies perform well. But I'm not going to get like PO'd when they don't perform well because I don't set high expectations for lower level fights, especially when I know what to expect from both fighters. And I knew what to expect from these two. Not much. Not much. And what did they deliver? Not much. Again, do I want more? Yes. Am I going to get excited when they do deliver more? Yeah, I'm going to be happy. But I'm not going to get mad when they don't perform well. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm not going to get mad when they live up to my expectations if my expectations are down here. Period. Now, let's talk about the middle ground. Those middling grounds here. So we had low expectations. Now we have middling expectations. And this is where you really got to be careful about what you expect from fighters and setting expectations and managing them. We had the main event of the night. We had 2 top 10 bantamweights, perennial contender Holly Holm and Ketlen Vieira. Holm and Vieta. Now, this is the main event bout. In some ways, you should expect a good fight from these two. That's what you should expect because they're two top 10 fighters. One of them is top 5, and the other's top 10. And at one point, a couple years back, was like considered a young up and coming prospect on the cusp of title contention. Of course, now Vieta is in title contention, having beaten Holm. But so I think it is natural to expect bigger things from this bout because of where they are in the rankings and everything. However, you have to remember who these fighters are. Holm isn't known for being particularly exciting. Does she occasionally have some fun, exciting fights? Yes. But for the most part, what does she do? She point fights her way to decisions. And Vieta, on the other hand, Vieta has been very inconsistent the last few years. Pretty much ever since she messed her knee up and had knee surgery, she's been very inconsistent. So, yeah, I can understand having higher expectations for this bout, but at the same time, you've got to lower them a little bit. So you can set the high expectations, but then you've also got to remember to manage those expectations because you've got a point fighter versus an inconsistent fighter. So you've got to bring those expectations a little bit lower and manage them. So that is a good example of a middling fight where, yeah, you kind of want to set higher expectations, but got to maybe bring them back down a little bit because of who it is. So let's talk about setting higher expectations. The type of fights you expect, and you should maybe set higher expectations and expect more out of the fighters, would be like 2 top 5 level fighters, number 1 contender fight, or even bigger championship bouts. Okay. That is when your expectations should be super high. Super high. Championship level fights should be way up here. Actually, way up here for championship bouts. You should be setting high expectations from that. And when they don't deliver, you should be very disappointed. Most recent example being the strawweight championship bout, the rematch of Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza. I think everybody had high expectations for Rose Namajunas in that bout. And then she failed to deliver. Absolutely failed. Now, Esparza, people didn't expect as much out of her. And she actually failed to deliver even just as much, too. Not as much as Rose, but she definitely failed to deliver, I think, to live up even to the expectations people had for her. So that should have been a very good fight, a rematch, years in the making. Great story behind it, too. The rematch of the inaugural strawweight championship, years in the making. The former champ taking on the fighter that she beat in the first fight, who is the sitting champ now. And that fight should have delivered. That fight absolutely should have delivered, and it failed to. That is an example of where if you set high expectations for that, I don't blame you. And if you were disappointed, again, I don't blame you. I was disappointed with that fight myself. That fight absolutely sucked. It totally failed to deliver. Now, let's move on to part 2 of this discussion. Part 2 is, I think it's weird that people were setting higher expectations for, say, these low-level fights, like the 2 strawweight bouts here, Reed versus Hughes and Viana versus Ricci. But yet, when some fighters don't deliver, when some, say, very popular championship level fighters don't deliver, people don't get up. People don't seem to get as upset, and I don't understand. I don't understand that. I think those are the fighters that need to be held accountable the most. And it seems that depending on popularity, they can get away with fairly underwhelming performances. And I think fans need to start holding these fighters more accountable for garbage fights. Okay. Rose versus Carla. That was a fight that, honestly, I think we saw a bit of a turnaround because people expected good things out of that fight and it did not deliver at all. And people, frankly, held them both to the fire. So I think that might be a sign of possibly things to come, which is good. But the history doesn't necessarily show that. Okay. So let's talk about fights that expectations were high, didn't deliver, and for some reason, people don't seem to get mad about. Okay. Trigger warning for all the Shevchenkos out there. For all the Shevchenkos, you're going to get triggered. Let's talk about Valentina Shevchenko versus Liz Carmouche number 2. That fight was complete trash. If people talk about Nunes versus Esparza 2 being trash, how about a fight, a championship bout that was so bad they cut the challenger afterwards. They actually cut a title challenger because the fight overall was so bad. That fight, it was the main event championship bout in a fight night in a brand new market. What country was that even in? I'm trying to remember. Now I'm curious. It was a brand new market for the UFC, and they booked a popular champion to main event it. And that fight sucked the air out of the place. That was UFC on ESPN Plus number 14. That was in Uruguay, Montevideo, Uruguay. Brand new market for the UFC. And that fight just... Both fighters got booed. Boo. It was an absolutely garbage fight. But did anybody hold Shevchenko accountable? Besides me, I didn't really see it. Most people were like, well, that was on Carmouche to take the fight to Shevchenko because she's the challenger. No, I'm sorry. You've got to hold... It takes 2 people to make a fight. And you've got to hold champions accountable for shitty fights. And nobody wants to hold Shevchenko accountable for an absolute trash fight. Well, I am right now. Okay. I see someone that people call a dominant champion. That wasn't a dominant performance. That was garbage. That was 2 fighters who didn't want to engage against the other. And people can say, well, it's on the challenger to take the fight to the champ. Well, how about it's on the dominant champion to show her dominance against the challenger, especially when she's such a huge favorite against everyone she faces. I'm sorry, that fight was a stinker. And I think both fighters need to be held accountable. Well, obviously, Carmouche was. She got cut. And honestly, I think if Shevchenko wasn't the champ, they probably would have cut her after that too. Because it wouldn't be the first time UFC cut fighters who didn't perform in main events. Sticking with triggering the Shevchenkos, how about Valentina versus Lauren Murphy? Up until the moment Valentina landed that head kick in the 4th round and finally saw the finish, that fight sucked. That fight absolutely sucked. Lauren Murphy was absolutely outgunned in that fight. That was like one of the biggest betting odd differences in UFC history. And it took Shevchenko to the 4th round to finish someone that everybody was saying had no business in there against her. And Shevchenko what did Shevchenko do? She played her usual defense first. I'm not going to engage unless you engage fight. But after the first round, Lauren Murphy was gun shy. Did Shevchenko go on the offense? No. She did not go for the finish until it basically was handed to her on a silver platter. I didn't have high expectations for Lauren Murphy going into that bout. I did have high expectations for Valentina Shevchenko. And I think everybody expected her to demolish Lauren Murphy. And it went into the fourth round. We've got to hold these so-called dominant champions, these popular champions, to higher expectations. We've got to hold them accountable for when they don't deliver in fights. Now, granted, okay, people are going to say, but she got the finish. She got the finish. It shouldn't have taken her to the fourth round. It should not. The odds in that fight were so far apart, and everybody expected her to absolutely demolish Lauren Murphy. She should have had her out within 2 rounds. Instead, it went into the championship rounds. Right? Yeah. Round 4. 4 minutes of the fourth round is the official time for that fight. Let's hold another dominant champion accountable. Amanda Nunes. Amanda Nunes has a bad habit of underperforming in fights too. And sometimes people hold her accountable, and other times they don't. But she's delivered some bad performances. For example, the Felicia Spencer fight. She should have finished Felicia Spencer. She could have, and she just rode it out to the decision. And I don't understand it. Maybe she was gassed. I don't know what was going on with that fight. But Amanda Nunes should have finished Felicia Spencer. She had it in her. Rode it out to a boring 5-round decision. Absolutely boring, uneventful fight. Really disappointing from Nunes. And she should be held accountable for that. Because she is the dominant champ. Popular or not, greatest of all time or not, she should be held accountable when she delivers boring fights. Or, here's another one. The second Germaine Durandamy fight. Durandamy. Talking about someone that she finished the first time they fought back in 2013. Finished in the first round. Second fight, absolutely boring decision. Absolutely boring decision. Nunes just took GDR down. Really didn't want to mess with GDR on the feet. Instead, took her down and just did nothing on the ground. Gassed out early, too. Did not show the improved cardio that we had expected from her in that fight. Instead, she got tired and just rode out the win. Terrible fight from Nunes in that one. Went to a decision against someone she defeated easily in the first fight. So that's another one. Another time when a so-called dominant champion should have been held more accountable. Now, it's not just the ladies, y'all. It's not just the ladies. The male champions need to be held accountable for garbage fights too. Here's a big one. Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero. That fight was absolute dog turds. Okay? That was Amber Turd level fight. Okay? That fight was terrible. People had high expectations for that fight. And it just absolutely did not deliver at all. And a lot of people were ready to trash Yoel Romero. And he deserves it. But it seemed like nobody wanted to trash Adesanya when they should have. I'm sorry. If a champion doesn't deliver in a fight, they need to be held accountable. If you have high expectations going into a fight for absolute excitement, it's not just one fighter that needs to be held accountable. It's both fighters that need to be held accountable. And nobody wants to hold Adesanya accountable when he has boring fights. That fight, like I said, it was Amber Turd. Terrible fight. Terrible, terrible fight. But nobody wants to hold Adesanya accountable for it. People, we need to hold champions accountable when they have garbage fights, okay? The whole idea that, well, it's on the challenger to take the fight to the champion. No, no. We need to expect more from the champions, okay? A champion should never just want to go in there and do the bare minimum in order to hold on to the belt. No, we need to expect championship level fights from champions. Okay? Hold these champions accountable when their fights suck. Okay? If you're a champion, you should want to go out there and prove why you're the champion. Not just do the bare minimum to get the win. You should want to go out there and prove I'm the champion and here's why. And go out there and absolutely dominate all the way to the decision, if not absolutely destroy the competition. Okay? A lot of people like to trash GSP for being boring, but guess what? GSP was rarely ever in a fight where people questioned his dominance. Or Robbie Lawler, when he was the welterweight champ, that dude didn't deliver boring fights. No, that dude went out there to fight. He went out there to prove that he was a champion. What was it? Was it the second fight against the Red King? What's his name? The Canadian? When he's like bleeding, he's got a split freaking upper lip, and he's like, I'm out here to show you that I'm the champ and I'm here to stay. That's what I want to see from a champion. A champion that goes out there to show everyone why they are the champ. None of this. Champion just does whatever, does just enough to get the win, keep the belt. Everyone goes, oh, yeah, you're the best, you're the best. It's on the challenger to prove, to take it to the champ. No, stop this, people. Stop this. Hold champions accountable when the fights suck. And that's all I have on that. So let's